Okay, this is Modeling 101, and one of the first things I want you to model is a coffee mug. And so you might as well go to Google image search and type it in. Now, I happen to have a coffee mug, and for a beginning modeler, this is the best case scenario because not only can you look at it at any angle that you please at any time, you can touch it, and this is huge. You get a lot of information out of touching things, so I highly recommend pretend that you are a potter and rub your hands all over this thing. Explore the shape of it and really get to know some of its finer details that you maybe have never noticed before. Images are great, but when you're first starting out, model a few things that you can pick up, hold in your hand, and touch every square inch of. Now, I know I just said that having the real object in your hands is the ideal scenario, but there's one better, which is the real object plus these images, these reference images. Because what the reference images do is they simplify the object down into some big ideas, some shapes that are sometimes easier to see when you're looking at an image rather than holding the rich, luscious, fully three-dimensional object in your hands. And so what I'm talking about is this view from above, which reveals the coffee cup to be a perfect circle that plummets down into space. This view from the side, which shows it almost to look like a rectangle. And this view of the handle, this drawing of the handle, which shows it to be an oval shape stuck onto the side. And that oval shape, if you imagine a little cross-section of the oval, that is also an oval. So an oval extruded in an oval shape, basically a torus. So these images are helpful, and I'm going to download them and put them in the folder and use them as I get started. Okay, I've got my images and I've got Blender open, but before I get them in, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save my Blender file. And I'm going to save it into my modeling folder. So what I have, if you look at it out in Finder, is a modeling folder and a blend file, and next to that a folder full of images, right? So this is an organized project tree. The project, the blend file, the images that go along with it, and there they are. Now I can bring them into Blender and have them always visible so that I can glance at them at any time. So I'm going to take my properties shelf and I'm going to split it 3 times by clicking on this little cross-hatched area, left-clicking and dragging down. I'm going to turn each of these into a UV image editor. The image editor is the part that I care about right now. And then I'm going to open reference images, the first one, the second one, and the third one. This one looks huge, so I'm going to roll the mouse wheel to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to grab the top of these headers, left click and drag down to hide them so that I can get the best view of everything. Great. And remember what I saw in these images, the circle extruded down into space. So I'm going to select all and delete. I'm going to Shift S and cursor to center. The cursor goes to the center. And I'm going to Shift A, add a circle. I am going to tab into edit mode, and I'm going to look at it from the top. Looks like a circle. I'm going to look at it from front view, orthographic, 1 key and the 5 key on the numpad. I see the line. That line's going to be this bottom line because it's sitting right now on the grid floor. So I'm going to take that circle, E to extrude, and move the mouse. I can extrude it anywhere, Z to constrain to the Z axis, and I'm going to move it up. And up we go. Looking at that, that looks taller than the image to me, so I'm actually just going to eyeball it. And that looks better, right around there. Okay, right? The image is there, and I can glance right back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and fine-tune and ask, does that feel right? I can then engage the fact that this has no depth, right? I know this coffee mug has depth. There it is. So let's give it some. I'm going to extrude again, but this time I'm going to right-click, which is going to leave the extrusion right where it is. So all those vertices are still there. If I grab them, you'll see that they're on top of another set of themselves, right? I just tap the G key to grab. The other vertices are right underneath there. So why did I right-click to leave them right on top of the ones beneath? Because I'm going to scale with the S key those vertices in a little bit, right? I have basically extruded the exterior surface of the mug up to the top edge, and now I'm scaling my second extrusion in a little bit to add some depth, right? This is a very common modeling technique. Once I have crawled up the outer edge and crawled along the top edge, I can now extrude down the inner edge. So what I'm going to do is extrude, constrain to the z-axis, and push down. Pretty soon it's out of sight, so I'm just going to place it somewhere for now, and I'm going to come into a more useful view. So I'm going to tap 1 on the numpad to come into front view. I still can't see it, however, so I'm going to tap the Z key to toggle into wireframe. Z toggles back and forth. Now I can see there's my depth. This is the outer wall. This is solid porcelain, as I imagine it, and that's the start of the inner wall, right? It's the same depth that you see up here, right? Outer wall, solid porcelain, inner wall. And I can now grab that, constrain with the Z key, so G, and then Z, and then pull down almost all the way to the bottom. Great, that's the bottom of my mug, and then I know there's some solid porcelain down here. Let's see what we've got. Awesome, a feeling of solidity, right? Now the coffee mug has an outer edge, a top edge, and an inner edge that all came from that circle, and it has no bottom. So I'm going to deal with the bottom outside next. So I could select each of these one at a time, or I could more quickly loop select them, which you do by holding down the Alt key and right-clicking on an edge. And I've got that bottom loop of vertices, which allows me now to tap the E key to extrude, right-click to leave the extrusion right on top of the vertices that were there before, the S key to begin scaling, and a mouse movement to bring those vertices in and in, and I'm closing up this gap. Notice how I'm going to undo this, or X to delete those vertices. I'm going to do it again, and I want you to look down here when I do it. So E to extrude, right-click to leave where it is, S to scale in, and notice how the scale is approaching 0, right? I'd like to go all the way, so I'm just going to type it. Even from way out here, I can type 0 on the numpad, boop, and now 0 fills all 3 values, and the vertices all scale perfectly down on top of each other. And then I can hit the Enter key to finish that scale, kind of like you would left-click to finish a scale maneuver. Okay, that's the bottom of the outside. Now we've got to get the bottom of the inside, which we can't see from here, so I'm going to tap the Z key to go into wireframe. Alt right-click on an edge of that inside bottom edge loop, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So I am going to E to extrude, and right-click to leave the extrusion in place, and then I'm going to scale inward. But instead of using the mouse, which is sloppy, I'm going to tap the 0 key on the numpad to be precise, Enter, and I am done. So now I look in the top, and the bottom inside of the mug is complete, and the bottom outside of the mug is complete, and I am done with the body of the mug, ready to move on to the handle. And the big question with the handle is where to begin. And so let's take a look. I'm going to Shift A and look at what we have. Plane, cube, circle, UV sphere, icosphere, cylinder, cone, torus. Look at the torus. It's sort of a donut shape. Look at the handle. It's sort of a donut shape with the hole really big. So let's try the torus as a starting point and see what we can do with it. I'm going to left click to put my cursor over here and Shift A, add torus. All right, there we go. The first thing I notice is that it is lying on its flat. I need to rotate it into an upright position. Looks like if I rotate around the x-axis, I will spin it into position. Rx will in fact do that. And it's going to be a 90-degree rotation. So I'm just going to type in 90 degrees. Great. I'm going to come into top view to see that the handle needs to be lined up better with the mug, centered on the mug. I'm going to come into front view to see that the handle is gigantic. So I'm going to scale it down until it's a little lower than the top, a little up from the bottom. Okay, that looks pretty good, but it looks massive compared to this handle, so scaling is making the whole torus larger or smaller. So I am actually going to, rather than hitting the S key, I'm going to hit the Alt S key. So hold down Alt and hit the S key. This will thicken or thin the torus. So now I can choose a handle thickness that feels better. So now that I like the thickness, I'm going to go ahead and position it against the body of the mug. The first thing I can see is that this is not a circle shape, it's an oval shape, and I've got a perfect circle here. So I'm going to go ahead and scale along X to squash my circle into more of an oval shape. Not intensely, but a little bit, just like that. And now I'm going to try to figure out how close or far from the wall of the mug. And if I look at the picture, what I can see here is that we've got a high point, and then the oval comes down into the body of the mug. So my high point needs to be out. This is too close because my high point's right at the wall. So somewhere about there feels pretty good. But when I look down at the bottom and look for the low point's in closer than the high point, right? They're not right above each other, which suggests that this is not only an oval, but it's leaning to one side. The high point down to the low point leans out this way a little bit. So I'm going to do that with a rotation. If I orbit the view, I can see that this is the y-axis running right through the center of my oval. And I can't see it from front view, but it's pointing right at me, and it's the axis that I want to rotate around if I'm going to lean this thing over. So R, Y, and I can lean it to the right a little bit. Might seem like a subtle thing, but these small details are what make objects come to life. Now I can find that high point that feels right, see where the low point lines up, and assess. So that feels all right, and that gives me a high point that comes down and down more, and a low point that doesn't happen until right near the body, and then a little hook up. And so I've got a high point that comes down and down more, and a low point that just hooks up a little bit at the bottom. Great. But I've got this problem. So the handle is still this full oval, and it's jutting into the mug. So I'm going to take one of these edge loops. I'm going to A to deselect all, and then I'm going to Alt right click on this edge loop, and this one rather than this one, because this edge loop is completely unnecessary. It's jutting completely into the mug. This one has some vertices jutting into the mug, but some are actually safely buried within the wall of the mug. And so I kind of want to finesse that edge loop, but really just get rid of this and everyone beyond it. So Alt right click to select it, X to delete its vertices, and I've gotten rid of those pieces. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm finding the first edge loop out that is completely within the coffee mug, selecting it, X, and deleting its vertices. And then this chunk is easy to select in its entirety. I'm just going to hover, tap the L key to link select it, and because it's not connected to this part of the mug or the body of the mug, link select stops with just this floating piece that I want to get rid of, X to delete its vertices, and off it goes. So now I can just tidy up these pieces here. I can Alt right click this edge loop, come into front view, come into wireframe view, get myself oriented. So I'm actually going to Alt right click on this edge loop and look at that in front view just to remember that that's the inner wall. The outer wall is pretty easy to see, but that's the inner wall, and I want to have this whole edge loop live within those two. So I just left clicked to put my 3D cursor on the inner wall because that's a little harder to see. And then I'm going to come back and grab this edge loop. And in front view, wireframe, now I know that I want to be between that edge and that edge. So I'm just going to rotate myself until I'm vertical and then grab and position that edge loop right in there. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. Now that I know what they are, I can just jump down here, rotate into position, and drop that into the mug. Let's see if we got rid of those. Yes, we did. And so now we have time for a little bit of finesse. Check out how this handle tapers. So it's not the same thickness all the way around. It gets thicker as it approaches the wall of the mug. So thin to slightly thicker. So I'm just going to replicate that in my design by selecting, let's have this, maybe this be the last edge loop that is standard width. This one will be scale slightly thicker. This one I'll scale up to be a little bit thicker still. And this one I'll scale up to be the thickest of them all. I'm exaggerating a little bit from reality just so that it's easy to see. Same thing here. I'm seeing, oh, interesting. That actually feels like the last bit of normal width. Then I see thinner, thicker, thicker. So let's have this be normal. This be scaled down a little bit. Then maybe normal, thicker, and the thickest of them all. What's that feel like? That doesn't feel half bad. Cool. All right, so I've got myself a coffee mug. It's funny, it feels right. It feels the tiniest bit thin. I feel like the whole thing could maybe be a little thicker. So I'm going to go back to my tool. I'm going to link select the whole handle with the L key. And then remember how S would scale the whole thing bigger and Alt S would make it thicker or thinner. I'm going to Alt S, make this thing a tiny bit thicker, which is hard to do. I move the mouse 1 pixel and the thing leaps forward. So I'm actually going to Alt S and then hold down, after I've tapped those, I'm going to hold down the Shift key. And the Shift key is going to refine that thickening just a little bit. I'm just trying to make this thing not feel flimsy. Let's try a little bit thicker. I don't know, just not noticeably thin. Oh, that feels all right. Now I've got a mug that is fully modeled. I can switch over into Cycles Render, because in Cycles Render I can hit the Shift-Z key to look at my mug in render view, left click to get that cursor out of the way. And in rendered view, one of the things you notice is that the mug that looks all faceted and kind of odd, like an odd gray, sort of lavender gray to gray gray, becomes not that terrible looking. It's a rather unified porcelain mug. If I were to go one step further and Shift A, add a plane, and Alt G to put my plane back at 0, 0, 0, and just scale it up and go into Shift C. I've got a mug that's sitting on a surface. It's a really gray day out, so if I were to go one step further, coming out of render view is just the Z key. If I were to go one step further and Shift A, add a lamp, a point lamp is a simple one to get started with. Then I could Shift Z and see some lighting on my mug. It's enough to say that does not look half bad. Body of the mug, handle of the mug, feeling of thickness, dark interior that gets darker the further down it goes. I can look down into the bottom. It feels like it has a bottom to it. I could grab the mug itself and lift it up. All of the modeling for this mug is complete.